While you're listening to this, something subtle is already happening. Your reality is being altered, not later, not tomorrow, but right now. Not because of the words themselves, but because of where your attention is landing as you hear them. You might think you're just watching a video, but your focus in this exact moment is shaping how your brain is responding, how your body feels, and what your mind is preparing for next. This is happening whether you notice it or not. Focus is the most underestimated creative force in human life. Not imagination, not effort. Focus. Because what you give your attention to doesn't just fill your thoughts. It trains your perception, guides your reactions, and quietly decides what becomes real for you. The question isn't whether focus is shaping your reality. It always is. The real question is whether you are choosing it or repeating it. You were trained to focus on the wrong things long before you had any choice in the matter. From the moment you were a child, your attention was guided, corrected, redirected. Not gently, but consistently. Sit still. Pay attention. Don't make mistakes. Look at what you got wrong. Improve this. Fix that. Be careful. Be realistic. Be afraid of failing. Very rarely did anyone say, "Notice what feels right," or "Stay with what's working," or "Observe how your mind moves when you feel calm." So without realizing it, your focus was shaped around lack, around errors, around what could go wrong. In school, you could get 9 answers right, but the red mark circled the one answer that was wrong. Your attention learned where to go. It learned that what matters most is what's missing. At home, praise was often conditional. Do well, behave, achieve, then you are seen. Your focus learned to scan for approval, to watch for signals of rejection, to stay alert. This wasn't done with bad intentions. It was a system built for efficiency, for control, for survival. But it came with a cost. You were rarely taught how to direct your attention inward. You were trained to look outward first, to measure yourself against standards, expectations, comparisons, and over time that became automatic. Now notice something important. Your brain doesn't distinguish between a real threat and a repeatedly imagined one. If your focus keeps returning to problems, to fears, to what's not enough, your nervous system treats that as reality. Your body tightens, your breathing changes, your decisions shrink, and slowly, quietly, this becomes your normal state. You may think you're just being realistic, responsible, mature, but often you're just focused where you were taught to look. Think about how often your attention goes to what's wrong before it goes to what's stable. How quickly your mind searches for danger in uncertainty. How natural it feels to replay mistakes, and how unnatural it feels to rest in something good without questioning it. That didn't come from nowhere. You were trained to focus on outcomes instead of processes, on results instead of presence, on future consequences instead of current experience. And when your focus lives mostly in the future or the past, the present starts to feel thin, almost invisible. Yet the present is the only place where anything actually changes. This training follows you into adulthood. At work, focus on deadlines, pressure, performance. In relationships, focus on what might be lost, what might go wrong, what the other person might think. Even in moments of rest, your attention doesn't fully rest. It scans, it checks, it prepares. And here's the subtle part most people miss. Whatever you consistently focus on becomes familiar. Familiar starts to feel normal. Normal starts to feel true. So if your focus has been trained on struggle, struggle feels real. If your focus has been trained on scarcity, abundance feels suspicious. If your focus has been trained on chaos, calm feels boring, even uncomfortable. This is not because calm is wrong, but because your nervous system hasn't practiced staying there. No one really told you that focus is a skill, that it can be trained differently. That attention is not just something that happens to you, but something that shapes you. Instead, you were rewarded for vigilance, for overthinking, for anticipating problems, for being ready. And again, this made sense in certain environments, but over time, what once protected you may now be limiting you. Notice how this plays out daily. You wake up and immediately check what needs to be done, what's urgent, what's wrong. You scroll and absorb other people's fears, opinions, comparisons. By the time your day truly begins, Your focus is already occupied, directed, hijacked, and yet very little attention is given to what's already here, to what's stable, to what's functioning, to what's quietly supporting you. Not because it isn't important, but because you were never trained to look there. This doesn't mean you should ignore problems or live in denial. It means your focus has been uneven, overtrained in one direction, underdeveloped in another. And this imbalance has consequences, because focus doesn't just color your thoughts, it shapes your perception. It decides what stands out and what fades into the background. Two people can live the same day and walk away with completely different experiences, simply because their attention was pointed in different places. This is where things begin to get interesting. Because if reality feels heavy, threatening, or lacking, the question may not be what is happening to me, but what has my focus been trained to notice? And once you start seeing that, a new possibility opens. Because if focus can be trained one way, it can be retrained another. And that leads to a deeper realization. Reality itself may not be what happens, but what you perceive happening through the lens of your attention. Reality is not what happens to you. It's what you perceive is happening. This may sound subtle at first, but it changes everything once you really sit with it. Events occur, yes. Situations unfold. People speak, act, decide. But the meaning of all of that, the weight, the emotion, the impact, doesn't come from the event itself. It comes from how your mind receives it, interprets it, and gives it a story. Two people can walk into the same room and walk out living completely different realities. One feels inspired, the other feels invisible. One feels threatened, the other feels curious. The room didn't change, the moment didn't change. What changed was perception. Your perception is not neutral. It is shaped by memory, belief, expectation, and especially focus. What you've been paying attention to trains your mind on what to highlight and what to ignore. And your mind is always filtering, always selecting. You never experience the full reality. You experience a version of it. Think about how often something small ruins an entire day. A short comment, a look, a delay. The event itself is brief, almost insignificant, but the perception around it expands. It becomes a narrative. This always happens to me. I'm not respected. Nothing ever works. And suddenly, one moment becomes a lens through which the rest of the day is viewed. On the other hand, something good can happen and pass almost unnoticed. A problem avoided, a kind gesture, a quiet moment of peace. If your perception isn't trained to register it, it barely leaves a trace. The event happens, but it doesn't become part of your reality. This is why arguing about facts rarely changes how someone feels. Because people don't live inside facts, they live inside interpretations, inside meaning, inside what feels real to them. Your nervous system responds to perception, not to objective truth. If your mind perceives danger, your body reacts, even if there is no real threat. If your mind perceives rejection, your chest tightens, even if no one actually rejected you. The body doesn't wait for proof. It follows perception. This is not a weakness. It's how humans are wired. But it becomes a problem when we confuse perception with reality itself. Over time, your perceptions start to stack. They create patterns, and patterns create expectations. You begin to expect disappointment, tension, or struggle. Then when something neutral happens, your perception bends it to match what you expect. Not consciously, automatically. This is why some people seem to live in a world full of obstacles, while others seem to live in a world full of opportunities. It's not that one life is objectively easier, it's that one mind is tuned to notice different signals. Your perception acts like a lens, and like any lens, it can be clear, distorted, narrow, or wide. If the lens is shaped by fear, you see threats. If it's shaped by lack, you see what's missing. If it's shaped by trust, you see possibilities. The same reality, different image. Most people never question the lens. They assume what they see is simply how things are. But what you see is how things appear through years of conditioning, habits of attention, emotional memory. This is why change often feels frustrating. You change something on the outside, but your experience doesn't improve. New job, same stress. New relationship, same patterns. New environment, same internal dialogue. The events changed, but the perception didn't. So reality, as you experience it, stayed the same. This is also why you can be in a safe place and still feel uneasy, or be in a chaotic moment and feel strangely calm. The external situation doesn't decide your reality, your perception does. And perception is not fixed. It moves, it adapts, it can be influenced. But here's the important part. Perception doesn't change through force. You can't command yourself to see things differently and expect it to work. Perception changes when attention changes. When you consistently direct your focus to different aspects of experience, your perception slowly recalibrates. This doesn't mean pretending everything is fine. It means noticing what you usually overlook. It means realizing that what you call reality is already a selection, not the whole picture. Once you see that, you begin to understand something deeper. Reality is responsive, not in a magical sense, but in a relational one. The way you perceive influences how you act. How you act influences how others respond. How they respond reinforces your perception. A loop is formed, and most people are living inside loops they never consciously chose. So the question becomes less about controlling events and more about noticing the filter through which events are passing. Because that filter determines what feels heavy, what feels light, what feels possible and what feels out of reach. And when you start to sense how much of your daily experience is shaped not by what happens, but by how it's perceived, another layer starts to reveal itself. Because if perception shapes reality, then attention, the thing that feeds perception, may be far more powerful than you were ever taught to believe. Science confirms it. Focus rewires the brain. And this is not a metaphor. It is not motivational language. It is a measurable biological process happening inside you every day. Your brain is not a fixed structure. It is alive, adaptive, constantly reshaping itself based on where your attention goes. Neurons that fire together begin to wire together. Paths that are used often become stronger, faster, more automatic. Paths that are ignored slowly weaken. This is how learning happens. But it is also how habits, emotional reactions, and even personality traits are formed. What you repeatedly focus on doesn't just influence your thoughts in the moment. It trains your brain on what to expect next. If your attention keeps returning to stress, your brain becomes efficient at stress. If it keeps returning to worry, your brain becomes skilled at anticipating problems. Not because you chose this consciously, but because your nervous system is doing what it does best, adapting to what it thinks matters most. This is why certain reactions feel instant and uncontrollable. The irritation that rises before you think. The anxiety that appears before logic has a chance to speak. These are not moral failures or lack of discipline. They are well-worn neural pathways responding exactly as they were trained to respond. And what trained them? Repetition of focus. Neuroscience shows that attention acts like a spotlight. Wherever it lands, neural activity increases. The more often the spotlight returns to the same place, the more that area of the brain develops. Over time, the brain begins to favor those pathways, choosing them even when they no longer serve you. This is why change feels difficult at first. When you try to focus differently, your brain resists. Not because it's broken, but because it prefers efficiency over growth. The old path is familiar. The new one requires effort, so the brain pulls you back to what it knows. But here's the part that's often left out. The same mechanism that wires fear can wire calm. The same system that reinforces limitation can reinforce clarity. The brain does not judge the content of your focus. It simply responds to it. When you begin to consistently place your attention on stability, on what is working, on moments of presence, something subtle happens. The nervous system starts to downshift. The body learns that it doesn't need to stay on high alert. The brain begins to allocate resources differently. This isn't about forcing positivity, it's about training attention. Studies on attention and neuroplasticity show that even small repeated shifts in focus can change how the brain processes information. Over time, People become less reactive, more emotionally regulated, more flexible in their thinking. Not because their lives became perfect, but because their brains became less dominated by threat-based patterns. And this internal shift doesn't stay internal. When your brain is less reactive, your behavior changes. You listen more fully. You respond instead of react. Your decisions become less impulsive. You notice more options. And when your behavior changes, the world responds differently to you. This is where science quietly meets something most people feel but can't explain. The external world starts to feel different, not because it magically transformed, but because your internal wiring changed how you engage with it. People treat you differently when your nervous system is calmer. Opportunities appear when your mind is open enough to see them. Conflicts dissolve faster when you're not feeding them with attention. These are not mystical claims. They are relational outcomes. Your focus doesn't directly control the world, but it controls how you show up in it. And how you show up influences what unfolds next. What's rarely emphasized is that this process is always happening, whether you are aware of it or not. Your brain is being rewired right now by what you're paying attention to. This moment is training your nervous system. So is the next one and the next. Most people assume that change requires dramatic effort or major life events, but neuroscience suggests something quieter and more powerful. Change begins with what you repeatedly notice. That's why scrolling through fear-based information day after day reshapes how safe the world feels. That's why constant comparison alters self-worth. And that's why even brief moments of intentional attention can begin to soften rigid patterns. The brain doesn't need intensity, it needs consistency. This also explains why some changes don't show up immediately. The brain doesn't rewire overnight. New pathways require repetition before they become dominant. In the beginning, the old patterns still fire. The old reactions still appear. And this is where many people assume nothing is happening. But something is happening beneath the surface. Every time you redirect your focus, even slightly, you are interrupting an old circuit and introducing a new one. At first, the signal is weak, it feels unnatural. But with time, it strengthens. And eventually, what once required effort becomes automatic. When you understand this, you stop asking why change feels slow. And you start paying attention to what your attention is feeding. Because if focus can rewire the brain, then what you repeatedly look at doesn't just shape your mind. It may also be shaping the patterns you begin to notice everywhere around you. What you overobserve begins to multiply, not because the world suddenly changes its rules, but because your attention keeps giving the same things more space to exist in your experience. You've probably noticed this in simple ways. You think about a specific car and suddenly you see it everywhere. You learn a new word, and it starts appearing in conversations, books, headlines. It feels strange, almost magical, but what's really happening is much quieter. Your brain has been told, this matters, so it starts highlighting it. The world didn't add more of that thing. Your awareness did. Your perception is constantly filtering millions of signals. Sounds, colors, movements, expressions, details. You only notice a small fraction. Focus is the instruction you give that filter. When you overobserve something, you're telling your mind to keep pulling it forward again and again. This is why problems grow when they are constantly examined. A small issue, when observed repeatedly, begins to feel bigger, heavier, more complex. Your mind finds more evidence, more examples, more reasons to stay with it. Soon the problem isn't just a situation, it becomes a theme. The same is true for fear. The more you watch it, analyze it, anticipate it, the more it seems to surround you. Fear multiplies not because danger increased, but because attention stayed locked on it. But this mechanism doesn't belong to negativity alone. It works in every direction. When you start noticing moments of ease, they begin to appear more often. When you observe kindness, you see more of it. When you give attention to progress instead of perfection, growth becomes visible. The thing you overobserve becomes the pattern you live inside. This can feel unsettling because it challenges a common belief. That reality is something fixed, and you are just reacting to it. But in truth, you are participating in it through what you notice. Your attention is not passive, it's creative in a subtle way. It doesn't invent things, but it selects which parts of reality become dominant in your experience. Think about how two people can live in the same city and describe it completely differently. One says it's hostile, stressful, overwhelming. The other says it's full of opportunity, energy, movement. Both are telling the truth, they're just over-observing different things. Your mind builds familiarity through repetition. When you repeatedly observe something, it becomes easier to notice next time. And because it's easier to notice, you notice it more. A loop forms. Over time, this loop begins to feel like just how life is. This is why certain patterns feel impossible to escape, not because they are objectively everywhere, but because your attention has been trained to search for them. And what you search for, you find. This also explains why some people feel like life keeps confirming their beliefs. People can't be trusted. Nothing ever works out. I always get the short end of the stick. These statements are not lies. They are the result of focused observation over time. Once a belief forms, attention works to protect it. It looks for proof. It filters out contradictions. So the belief appears to be reinforced by reality, when in fact it's being reinforced by observation. This doesn't mean you are imagining things. It means you are living attaching more weight to certain signals than others. The danger here is not noticing problems. It's over-observing them without balance. When attention stays glued to what's wrong, what's missing, what's unfair, your reality starts to feel crowded by those things. Even when moments of stability exist, they pass unnoticed, and slowly, a sense of heaviness sets in. A feeling that life is always demanding, always challenging, always one step away from collapse. Not because it is, but because that's where the spotlight has been living. But here's the part that gives you back agency. The same way over-observing chaos multiplies chaos, over-observing clarity multiplies clarity. The same way watching lack amplifies lack. Watching sufficiency reveals support. This doesn't require forcing your mind to think differently. It requires noticing where your attention lingers naturally and gently questioning whether it deserves that much space. You don't have to stop observing problems. You just don't have to live inside them. Because the more attention something receives, the more your nervous system organizes around it. Your emotions align with it. Your decisions orbit it. And soon, your days start to resemble the thing you've been watching the most. This is why focus feels like a magnet, not because it pulls events out of thin air, but because it organizes your experience around certain themes. And once you begin to sense how observation multiplies what it touches, another question arises quietly. If attention can amplify experiences, then what happens when focus itself becomes attached to tension, drama, and constant stimulation? Because for many people, without realizing it, focus doesn't just observe chaos, it becomes addicted to it. Focus acts as a silent magnet, not in a dramatic or mystical way, but in a quiet, practical way that most people overlook, because it doesn't announce itself. It just works in the background, shaping what enters your life and what stays away. Think about how certain patterns seem to follow people. One person keeps encountering conflict wherever they go. Another keeps finding support in unexpected places. One feels like life is always pushing back. Another feels like doors open just enough at the right time. From the outside, it looks like luck or personality. But underneath, there is often a consistent direction of focus. Your focus influences how you move through the world. It shapes your tone of voice, your posture, your patience, your choices. People and situations respond to those signals, even if no one consciously notices them. And over time, those responses accumulate into what you call your reality. When your focus is fixed on danger, you behave cautiously. You hesitate. You pull back. Others feel that distance and respond with less openness. Opportunities pass because you weren't looking for them. This confirms your original focus. The magnet holds. When your focus is fixed on trust, you behave differently. You listen. You allow space. You take small risks. People feel that and often meet you there. Again, the magnet holds. Nothing supernatural is required for this to work. It's relational, it's behavioral, it's neurological. Focus organizes your internal state, and your internal state influences the external feedback you receive. This is why grateful people often seem to have more luck. Gratitude shifts focus toward what is already supportive. That focus softens the nervous system. A softer nervous system makes clearer decisions. Clearer decisions tend to produce better outcomes. The world doesn't change randomly. It responds to how you show up. The same principle explains why people stuck in resentment often keep finding reasons to stay there. Their focus is tuned to injustice, disrespect, unfairness. So they notice it quickly. They react strongly. Others react back. The magnet strengthens. Your focus doesn't attract situations out of thin air. It attracts responses. It pulls certain interactions closer and pushes others away. And because this happens subtly, it feels like reality is doing it to you. Another layer of this magnet effect is expectation. What you expect shapes what you prepare for. If you expect rejection, you guard yourself. If you expect conflict, you brace. If you expect difficulty, you tense before anything even happens. People sense this. Situations shift around it. Expectation is focus extended into the future. This doesn't mean that focusing on something guarantees it will happen. Life is more complex than that. But focus increases probability. It tilts the field. It makes certain outcomes more likely by aligning your behavior, perception, and decisions in that direction. This is why people can unintentionally magnetize stress. If your focus is always on urgency, everything becomes urgent. If your focus is on problems, every situation presents itself as a problem to solve. Even neutral moments start to feel heavy. And here's the part that often goes unnoticed. The magnet doesn't shut off when things are going well. Many people continue to focus on what could go wrong even in moments of peace. They scan for threats, they anticipate loss, and that anticipation subtly shapes what comes next. This creates a strange experience where life feels unstable even when it isn't. The magnet keeps pulling the same themes because attention keeps feeding them, but the magnet works both ways. When you focus on stability, you become more stable. When you focus on clarity, you begin to act with more clarity. When you focus on learning instead of failure, experiences start to feel less threatening and more informative. You don't need to control every thought to change this. You just need to notice where your attention returns when you're not trying. That's the direction of the magnet. Most people assume they are reacting to life, but much of the time, life is reacting to them. Not in punishment or reward, but in resonance. Energy meets energy. Signals meet signals. This is why two people can face the same challenge and walk away with different results. One approaches it with tension and resistance, the other with curiosity and steadiness. The challenge responds differently to each. And if focus is a magnet, then it raises an uncomfortable question. What happens when your focus is constantly pulled toward drama, conflict, and intensity? When your attention has been trained to seek chaos because it feels familiar, stimulating, or even safe? Because in that case, the magnet doesn't just attract situations. It becomes addicted to them. The hidden danger is not chaos itself. It's the addiction to it. Chaos has a strange pull. It grabs attention. It creates movement. It makes you feel alive, alert, needed. And for many people, without realizing it, chaos becomes familiar territory. Not because it feels good, but because it feels known. When your nervous system has spent years in survival mode, calm can feel unnatural. Silence can feel empty. Stability can feel suspicious. So your attention keeps drifting back to what's intense, dramatic, urgent. Not on purpose, out of conditioning. This is how addiction to chaos begins, not as a choice, but as an adaptation. If you grew up in environments where unpredictability was normal, your body learned to stay ready, to scan, to anticipate, to react quickly. That skill may have protected you once, but later it can quietly run your life. Even when things are going well, the mind searches for what might disrupt it. A problem to solve, a conflict to revisit, a future scenario to worry about. Peace doesn't hold attention for long because the system isn't trained to rest there. This doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it shows up as constant busyness, filling every moment with noise, tasks, information. Other times it appears as emotional turbulence, repeating the same arguments, the same frustrations, the same stories. The details change, but the emotional tone stays the same. Chaos becomes the baseline. Your focus feeds this pattern. The more attention chaos receives, the more the brain strengthens the pathways that detect it. Soon, the mind becomes incredibly efficient at finding problems. Even neutral situations start to feel loaded. Even small challenges trigger big reactions. And because this happens automatically, it feels like life is the source of the chaos, not your focus. There is also a subtle reward system at work. Chaos creates stimulation, adrenaline, a sense of importance. When something is wrong, you feel engaged. When everything is fine, you might feel restless, bored, or uneasy. So without noticing, you return to what activates you. This is not a personal flaw. It's biology meeting conditioning. The modern world amplifies this. Constant alerts, breaking news, endless opinions, comparison, outrage. Your attention is trained daily to jump, react, and judge. Calm doesn't get clicks. Urgency does. So your focus is constantly pulled toward what's loud, alarming, or divisive. Over time, this shapes your inner landscape. You may notice that even in moments of quiet, your mind creates noise. It replays conversations. It imagines worst-case scenarios. It looks for something to fix. The addiction doesn't need external chaos anymore. It generates its own. The danger here is not stress itself. It's losing the ability to recognize peace when it's available. When chaos becomes familiar, stability feels empty. And when stability feels empty, you don't stay there long enough to let it rewire you. This is why some people sabotage calm periods in their lives. Not consciously, but subtly. They start unnecessary conflicts. They overcomplicate simple situations. They make decisions from tension instead of clarity. And afterward they say, "I don't know why this keeps happening." The answer is often hidden in where attention feels most alive. Addiction to chaos also distorts perception. When your focus is tuned to disruption, you interpret ambiguity as threat. You assume negative intent. You prepare for impact before it arrives. And this preparation influences how others respond to you, often creating the very friction you feared. Again, a loop forms. Breaking this pattern doesn't mean eliminating chaos from life. Chaos will always exist. It means noticing your relationship to it. Do you feel drawn to it? Do you feel uncomfortable when things are calm? Do you trust peace, or do you wait for it to break? These are not questions of character. They are signals of focus. The moment you begin to notice this pattern, something shifts. You start to see that your attention is not just responding to chaos, it's seeking it. And once you see that, you can begin to create space between stimulus and focus. This space is important, because without it, attention stays hijacked. With it, attention becomes a choice again. And this leads to a deeper realization. If chaos can capture focus so completely, then focus itself must have immense power, powerful enough to lock you into cycles or slowly release you from them. Which raises the next question quietly, almost uncomfortably. If your focus has been shaped by chaos, what happens when you begin to change what you observe? Knowing that observation itself alters what unfolds next. What you observe does not remain untouched. In a very real way, what you observe begins to observe you back. This idea sounds abstract until you notice it in daily life. The moment you pay attention to something, your relationship with it changes. And at the same time, your internal state shifts in response to that attention. Observation is not neutral. It is participatory. When you observe a situation with suspicion, your body tightens, your tone changes, your patience shortens. The situation then responds to that energy. People sense it. Outcomes bend around it. What you are watching now seems to confirm your expectation. When you observe with openness, your breathing softens. You listen differently, you leave space. The situation responds in a different way, not because it knows your thoughts, but because it's interacting with a different version of you. This is the overlooked feedback loop. Observation changes the observer. You are not standing outside of life watching it unfold. You are inside it, affecting it through where and how you place your attention. The way you observe trains your nervous system in real time, and that training influences your next move. This is why repeated observation shapes identity. If you constantly observe yourself as failing, you begin to move like someone who expects failure. If you observe yourself as learning, you move with more curiosity and resilience. The story you watch becomes the story you live. Even your inner world responds to observation. When you watch your thoughts with judgment, they become louder, more defensive. When you watch them with calm interest, they lose intensity. The act of observing changes the quality of what is observed. This isn't philosophy. It's something you can feel. Notice how a problem behaves when you stare at it with pressure. It feels heavier, more urgent, more complex. Notice how the same problem behaves when you give it space. When you stop wrestling with it and simply notice it, it often loosens. Your attention is like a tone you set, and life answers in the same tone. This is why certain emotional patterns persist, not because they are fixed, but because they are being watched in a particular way. Fear observed with resistance grows. Fear observed with awareness softens. The difference is not the emotion, it's the quality of attention. And this is where science quietly intersects with experience. Studies show that observation affects outcomes, not only in controlled experiments but in human behavior. When people feel watched, they act differently. When you watch yourself, you also act differently. Self-observation changes behavior. Environmental observation changes interaction. Observation is influence, but most people are unaware of how they observe. They assume observation is just noticing facts. In reality, it's layered with emotion, memory, expectation. You don't just observe what happens, you observe through a lens shaped by the past, and that lens shapes what happens next. This is why repeating the same patterns feels inevitable. You observe the world expecting a certain result. That expectation shapes your behavior. Your behavior invites a response. The response confirms your expectation, and the loop continues. Breaking the loop doesn't require changing the world. It requires changing how you observe it. This is subtle work. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't produce instant results. And that's why it's often overlooked. People want visible change first, but observation changes things from the inside out. There is also a deeper implication here. If observation affects the observed, then attention is not just a passive act. It is an active force, quiet, consistent, and powerful. You don't need to understand complex theories to see this. You just need to notice how people respond to you when your attention is tense versus when it's calm. How situations unfold when you approach them with fear versus curiosity. How your own thoughts behave when watched versus ignored. Once you see this, it becomes harder to believe that you are simply at the mercy of circumstances. You begin to sense that you are in relationship with reality, not separate from it. And this realization brings both responsibility and freedom. Because if observation participates in shaping experience, then how you observe matters more than you were ever taught. But there's another layer to this. Even when you change how you observe, the world doesn't always respond immediately. Sometimes it seems unchanged. Sometimes it even appears to push back. And this is where many people misunderstand what's happening, not realizing there is a natural delay between a shift in focus and what shows up next. Change rarely appears the moment you expect it to, and this delay is one of the main reasons people stop trusting their own efforts. When you shift your focus, something real does happen immediately, but it happens inside first. Your nervous system adjusts, your perception recalibrates, your reactions begin to soften or reorganize. These changes are subtle, and because they don't announce themselves, the mind assumes nothing is happening. We are taught to believe that cause and effect are instant. Do something, get a result. If the result doesn't show up quickly, we conclude the action didn't work. But inner change follows a different rhythm. It moves like a tide, not a switch. Imagine turning a large ship. You can move the wheel right now, but the ship doesn't change direction instantly. Momentum carries it forward for a while. From the deck, it may look like nothing has shifted, but beneath the surface, the course is already changing. Your focus works the same way. When you begin observing differently, the world you're experiencing is still reflecting old patterns, old expectations, old reactions from people who have known you in a certain way, old habits in your own behavior. This doesn't mean your new focus is ineffective. It means you are seeing the residue of the past. This delay can feel discouraging. You pay attention differently, speak more carefully, react less, and yet life still presents the same challenges. The mind quickly says, "See, nothing changed." And if you believe that thought, you often return to old focus patterns, restarting the cycle. This is the trap. Change fails not because focus lacks power, but because patience collapses under uncertainty. There is also a biological reason for this delay. Your brain doesn't immediately abandon old neural pathways. They have momentum. They've been reinforced over years. New pathways start weak. At first, they don't dominate your reactions, so you still feel the old impulses. You still notice the old triggers. This makes it seem like nothing is different. But difference is already forming. Another part of the delay is relational. People around you respond to patterns they are familiar with. When you change your internal state, they don't instantly adjust. Some continue treating you the same way. Some even resist the change because it disrupts their expectations. This can make it feel like your efforts are invisible. They're not invisible, they're just new. There is also the expectation problem. Many people change their focus while secretly watching for proof. They monitor reality closely, looking for confirmation. This monitoring often pulls attention back to lack, to impatience, to comparison. The new focus is diluted by the old habit of checking. It's like planting a seed and digging it up every day to see if it's growing. The delay is not empty time. It's integration time. It's the period where your system is learning to trust a new way of seeing and responding. During this time, your inner experience may already feel different, even if external circumstances look the same. You might notice you recover faster after stress. You pause before reacting. You feel less pulled into drama. These are signs of change, but they're often dismissed because they don't match dramatic expectations. And because they're dismissed, they don't get reinforced. Change also doesn't appear evenly. Some areas shift quickly. Others lag behind. You may feel calm in one situation and reactive in another. This unevenness is normal. It doesn't mean you're failing. It means different patterns have different depths. The danger is interpreting delay as evidence that nothing works. That belief itself becomes a new focus, reinforcing frustration and doubt. And doubt pulls attention back to old patterns because they feel more certain. Understanding delay changes how you relate to the process. You stop demanding immediate results and start noticing subtle movement. You stop measuring success only by external change and begin valuing internal stability. This shift in expectation is crucial because once you expect delay, delay no longer feels like failure. It feels like part of the process. And here's something rarely said. The moment you stop trying to force change, change accelerates. Because forcing is often just another form of tension, another way of focusing on what's missing. When you allow time for focus to settle, reality reorganizes itself gradually. Conversations shift. Opportunities appear in quieter ways. Patterns loosen without drama. But this requires trust. Not blind belief, but trust in observation. Trust that what you consistently attend to is shaping something, even when you can't yet see the full result. And this brings us to a deeper insight. If change is delayed because reality is still reflecting old focus, then the life you are living now may not be a response to who you are becoming, but to who you have been focusing as until recently. There is always a delay between an inner shift and an outer result. And this delay is where most misunderstand what is actually happening. When something changes inside you, the world doesn't immediately rearrange itself to match. Instead, it continues responding to the patterns that were active before. This can feel confusing. You feel different, but life looks the same. You think differently, but situations haven't caught up yet. This gap creates doubt. You may start asking yourself if the inner shift was real, if you're imagining progress, if you're wasting time. But the delay is not a sign of failure. It's a sign of transition. Your inner state influences your behavior, but behavior influences outcomes over time, not instantly. Every new way of responding needs repetition, before it becomes visible in the world. The external environment moves slower than internal awareness. Think of it like changing the temperature of a large room. You adjust the thermostat, but the air doesn't warm immediately. For a while it feels unchanged, but the system is already working. The shift is underway, even if your senses haven't caught up yet. The same is true for focus. When you change what you pay attention to, your nervous system adjusts first. Your tone softens, your reactions slow, your decisions become more deliberate. These shifts are subtle. They don't demand attention. So the mind overlooks them and keeps scanning for external proof. But life responds to patterns, not moments. One calm response doesn't rewrite a relationship. One clear decision doesn't change a career. But repeated calm responses change how others experience you. Repeated clarity changes the trajectory of your choices. Over time, these patterns accumulate and become visible. The delay exists because reality is relational. It's built through interaction, and interactions need time to reorganize. There's also an emotional aspect to this gap. When you change internally, you often outgrow old dynamics before new ones appear. This can feel like emptiness, like being in between. The old no longer fits, but the new hasn't arrived yet. Many people misinterpret this in-between state as loss, as regression, as something going wrong. In truth, it's a sign that your focus has moved, but your environment hasn't fully adjusted. This is often when old patterns try to pull you back. They offer familiarity, predictability. Even if they weren't healthy, they feel known. And in the absence of immediate results, the mind is tempted to return to what it recognizes. This is where awareness matters. If you understand the delay, you don't panic inside it. You don't rush to fill it with noise or force outcomes. You allow it to do its work. Another reason the delay feels uncomfortable is that it removes distraction. When you're no longer feeding old reactions, there is more space. And space can feel unsettling if you're not used to it. Silence invites awareness. Awareness brings clarity, and clarity can challenge long-held identities. So instead of celebrating change, the mind sometimes resists it. The delay also reveals how much of your old reality was sustained by your own participation. When you stop reacting the same way, certain situations lose energy. Conflicts don't escalate. Drama doesn't land. This can feel anticlimactic, almost disappointing. But it's actually progress. Outer results are slower because they are echoes. They reflect accumulated inner patterns, not current intentions. What you're seeing now is often the last wave of a previous focus. This is why patience is not passive here. It's active trust. Trust that consistency matters more than intensity. Trust that quiet changes are still changes. The world is not ignoring your inner shift, it's adjusting to it at its own pace. And as long as you don't abandon the new focus during the delay, something begins to reorganize. People respond differently. Situations unfold with less friction. Opportunities that couldn't appear before now have room to emerge, but this only becomes obvious later, looking back. In the moment, it just feels like waiting. Understanding this delay changes your relationship with effort. You stop trying to prove that change is working. You stop watching the clock. You start living from the new focus instead of checking for results. And then, without warning, the outside begins to reflect what has been true inside for a while, which leads to a final, often surprising realization. The reality you're living now may not be responding to who you are today, but to the focus you carried weeks, months, or even years ago. Here is the twist that changes how you look at everything you're living right now. Your current life is not the result of what you're focusing on today. It is largely the residue of where your attention has been resting for a long time. This can feel uncomfortable at first because it removes the idea that life is happening randomly. But it can also feel strangely relieving, because if what you're seeing now is old residue, then what you're focusing on now is shaping something that hasn't arrived yet. Most people judge their present as a final verdict. They look at their relationships, their work, their emotional state, and assume it reflects who they are today. In reality, much of what you're experiencing is a delayed response to past patterns of attention. Think about habits. If you eat a certain way for years, your body doesn't change overnight when you adjust your diet. For a while, it still reflects the old pattern. The same is true for focus. Your life carries momentum. Decisions you made from fear continue to echo. Expectations you held continue to shape interactions. Ways you saw yourself continue to influence how others relate to you. Even if your inner focus has shifted, the external world may still be responding to who you were trained to be. This explains a common frustration. You feel more aware, more grounded, less reactive. Yet your circumstances haven't caught up. Old dynamics still appear. Old challenges resurface. It can feel like the shift didn't matter, but the shift mattered first. Residue is not proof that nothing changed. It's proof that something is finishing its cycle. Your current reality is like a wave already in motion. You can't stop it mid-crest, but you can influence the next one. Where your focus rests now is shaping what will follow, not what is already unfolding. This perspective softens self-judgment. You stop blaming yourself for not being there yet. You stop forcing results. You realize you are in a transition, not a failure. It also changes how you interpret challenges. Instead of asking, why is this still happening? You begin to ask, what pattern is this completing? That shift alone changes how much energy you give to the situation. Old focus residue shows up in subtle ways. Conversations that feel outdated, emotional reactions that surprise you, situations that don't quite match who you feel you are becoming. These moments can feel disorienting, but they are often signs of growth, not stagnation. Many people make the mistake of trying to correct the residue instead of letting it pass. They argue with it, fight it, overthink it, and in doing so, they reattach focus to it, extending its life. Residue fades when it is not fed. This doesn't mean ignoring reality. It means responding from your current focus, not reacting from old habits. The residue loses strength when it no longer finds the same emotional hooks. This is also why comparing yourself to others becomes less useful at this stage. You don't know what focus they've been carrying or for how long. Everyone is living inside a different delay. Judging your process against someone else's visible result only pulls attention away from what you're shaping now. Understanding residue requires honesty. It asks you to look back at where your attention lived, not with guilt, but with clarity. What stories did you repeat? What emotions did you revisit daily? What did you expect more than anything else? Those patterns built the foundation of what you're seeing today. And here's the empowering part. If old focus created this reality, new focus will create a different one. Not instantly, not dramatically, but reliably. You don't need to fix the past. You don't need to punish yourself for it. You just need to stop reinforcing it with your attention. This is where patience becomes wisdom. You allow the residue to clear. You stay aligned with the focus you're choosing now. You let life catch up. And as this happens, something shifts in how you relate to time. You stop demanding immediate proof. You start trusting direction. Which brings the journey to a deeper question. If your life is shaped by accumulated focus, then the most important thing is no longer what you're trying to change on the outside, but what you're consistently paying attention to each day. So the real diagnostic question is not, how is your life going? It's simpler and more honest than that. Where does your attention rest most days? Not where you wish it would be, not where it goes for a few minutes, but where it naturally returns when no one is watching. Because attention is the seed of your next reality. What you consistently notice, you nourish. What you nourish grows. And what grows quietly becomes the life you live. You can spend years trying to control outcomes, fix circumstances, or chase change on the outside. That path is exhausting. Or you can begin with the one place that shapes everything else, where you place your focus. Nothing needs to be forced, just observed. Because the moment you become aware of your attention, you begin to regain authorship over what comes next. If you stayed with this until the end, write this exact sentence in the comments. I choose my focus. And if this resonated with you, watch one of the videos appearing on the screen now. If you want more content like this, that's where the next step is waiting.